Right. So we're on to the next one, which is the second half of the 2021
21.
paper. Are you going Declaratory Act or T Act?
The COVID paper.
Yeah,
Um, I am going to go definitely the T Act.
cool. Do you want to lead off or am I leading off? What do you want to do?
I can lead if you like.
Actually, if you're going to go
So
stronger, should I not make the case for Declaratory Act and you can take it apart?
okay,
Cool.
you go.
So I'm going to say the Declaratory Act ha had the greater impact on relations between Britain and the colonies, not because of it itself, but because of what came afterwards. So I think the key point of the Declaratory Act is it was Parliament, after they completely capitulated at the end of the Stamp Act, basically removing, as we made allegories to before, all of their teacherly authority over their classroom of naughty American school children. They then passed the Declaratory Act that says they still have the right to tax. Now, I think the sheer pointlessness of the Declaration is the reason why it had a great impact on Britain and the colonies, because it establishes the idea that the pragmatic element of this is gone. For the British, it's asserting their power, the power of parliamentary sovereignty over the colonies, and that means as long as that act is in place, that there there's always going to be this conflict because the colonists are not going to accept that salutary neglect has ended. Um, they're not going to accept that Parliament has sovereignty or supremacy over their colonial assemblies because they see them as all equals. And I think the Declaratory Act has that consequence. I think it it also the Townsend duties are only passed to prove that the Declaratory Act exists. So without the Declaratory Act, maybe they wouldn't have felt because obviously they believe that what's the point in having it if they don't actually enforce it? So therefore they had to. They put the Townsend duties in place. Resistance comes strongly at that. That is removed. And then the Tea Act is kind of a defiant continuation because they leave the tax on tea to continually prove that the Declaratory Act has a purpose. And without that legacy of it being kept on tea, I don't think the Tea Act would have been passed. So I think the Tea Act is a culmination of Britain's continual attempt to enforce its parliamentary sovereignty over the colonial assemblies. And therefore, it's that defiance. If they'd removed the Stamp Act and left it alone and not passed the Declaratory Act, I don't think the rest of the things would have escalated from there.
Oh, I think that's a bit of a stretch, James. That's a bit of a stretch.
But it's my
I mean,
job. My job to make.
you don't have a great argument. When it's a catalyst argument, you kind of, you
Yeah,
make
I
your
don't know. I
point.
think it's all right, actually, as an argument. Go on, make your case. I'll tell you why you're wrong.
Yeah, so well, I think you said some of the points. So if you address the Declaratory Act first, obviously it occurs first. It's in 1766, the year after the Stamp Act.
Are you going to challenge any of my points I made about why it's important?
I will try.
Go on then.
I'll do my best.
You're going to make why the T Act's
In
important
in in
first.
the in the spirit of Gentleman Johnny coming down to
It's not a good
keep.
person to compare yourself to. This is your Saratoga moment. Overconfidence.
Right. So you have to address both, right? Both one and two. So let's address the Declaratory Act
Yeah,
first.
well, we make the case
Um,
for one, so you can. I've made the case for the Clarity Act. If you think I've missed anything, add it. If not, you can tear it apart. But if you go, I'll take down your T Act.
um, yeah, the Declaratory. I think by most standards, the Declaratory Act was unwise. It
Yeah,
certainly didn't help the British case at all. It was meant to, so they repeal the Stamp Act. And in order to try to save face, they also issue the Declaratory Act, which reaffirms the authority of Parliament, right? As I said, it's a bit like capitulating to a class of naughty students and then affirming in theory your authority over them without actually doing anything,
yeah.
which is going to encourage them to rebel, I believe, James.
These are all my points.
So
You kind of challenge my
yeah.
points, or just reinforce them.
Look, I'm building up to my grand finale,
Go on in,
like
go
in
on in.
WCW wrestling,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm like that big wrestler about to
yeah,
jump
yeah,
on you and yeah, throw you out of the ring.
yeah.
Okay, so um Sorry for a WCW reference
Mm.
in that. So, okay, yeah. So, but the Declaratory Act, I don't think in itself led particularly to worsening relations. It showed revealed parliamentary weakness. I think the Stamp Act also revealed parliamentary weakness. I think it was a bit pathetic. But the Tea Act, it's not the argument. I think that the real moment in which revolution becomes inevitable is not so much the back and forth about taxation. It's when the British start to use force. And the reason why the the circumstances for the British applying using force is the Tea Act. Yeah. So as you say correctly, the Tea Act is part of the Townsend duties. They also repeal all of the other Townsend duties, but they keep the Tea Act. They think that from the British perspective, they think that it's a very, very minor tax on tea. They think they can kill two birds with one stone, right? They can save face. They can also give a
But
bit of a boost
the
to the
tax is already
East,
yeah.
give a boost to the East India Company. Give it the monopoly on tea. This is annoying, but the the fact that this leads to the Boston Tea Party much more directly. So even if you're using the catalyst argument,
Yeah.
the catalyst
I
argument
just want to
works a lot
make
better for the Tea Act.
I just want to make a point that obviously the tea tax has been in place since the Townsend Duties were repealed. The Tea Act is just giving the monopoly to
That's
the
right.
monopoly import to the East India Company. So like
Right.
you know
Right.
it's been there since 1768 still the tax on tea.
Right. With the Townsend duties.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But the Tea Act, the fact that this exists, there's a lot of resentment, and then there's this kind of inflammatory event where when these guys dress up as Native Americans and dump the tea in the ocean, right? The Boston Tea Party. It's a response to this. And I think that's very important. That's actually definitely more significant for moving ahead the revolution than I think the Declaratory Act was.
Mm.
So if you're going to use the catalyst argument, I think it works better for the Tea Act, in other words. The Tea Act in itself, no. Tea Act in itself doesn't is in itself um, not a major cause for rebellion, but the fact that it leads directly um, to the Boston Tea Party,
Yeah.
and then the repressive measures. So once they throw the tea into the ocean, which is a terrible thing to do, then the British really do get annoyed and exert oppressive measures, and I think that then things really quickly spiral out of control. So there you go. That's my argument.
I'm not arguing that that's not important, but my key point is if tax on tea is not there, can the Tea Act be passed? And if the Declaratory Act isn't passed, the tax on tea isn't there with the Townsend duties.
But the Declaratory
Because
Act,
the
the Declaratory
Townsend
Act is, yeah, the Declaratory Act is irrelevant though. It's purely symbolic.
yeah, it is, but the Townsend duties
So
only passed to prove that the Declaratory Act has a point. So without the, it's not that the Townsend duties they use the Declaratory Act to pass the
no,
Townsend.
no,
Townsend duties are
yeah,
entirely passed because they need to show that the whole argument of Townsend is we have this Declaratory Act doesn't mean anything unless we do something with it. So therefore
that's
they bring in the Townsend duties. And without
but
that, the Act wouldn't have come
that's
out.
you're playing a rhetorical game though. I think James. I think that it's not the Declaratory Act. It's the authority of Parliament
Yeah,
that
but the Declaratory Act,
they're trying to protect.
yeah, they
The
are, but I
Declaratory
don't.
Act the Declaratory Act just is a face saving maneuver and a pretty pathetic one at
Yeah,
that.
but when
So
Townsend brings it in, he literally says, we need to bring the Townsend duties in to prove that the Declaratory Act exists. There's no point having it just on paper. We have to show it. So,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's
yeah.
in order to prove that they're face saving off the Stamp Act, has bite and teeth. So that's why I think the Declaratory Act is really important because I think it's like almost more important than the Stamp Act itself because the Stamp Act gets repealed. It's this legacy of this act that's sitting there saying Parliament is superior. It's literally defying the, like basically daring the colonists to be like, come on then, we're telling you Parliament's authority is supreme. What are you going to do about it, basically?
Well, everyone knew. I mean, everyone knew that in theory anyway.
That it was supreme.
Yeah.
No, the colonists never accepted parliamentary sovereignty. They always believed their colonial assemblies are equal to the parliament. So the English assumed it was superior, but there's no way the colonists ever accepted that parliament was superior to them. They saw their colonial assemblies as equal to parliament under the crown. So I think the Declaratory Act was inflammatory because it's basically saying no. And it's basically like saying salutary neglect is never going to be back again.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, I literally think because the tea tax comes out of the Townsend duties, and the Townsend duties are only there to enforce the Declaratory Act.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think
Because what's the point of the
what
Townsend
makes
duties? They raise no money. They're not there for anything other than to prove that Parliament has superiority.
my argument simpler. So I just appeal to simplicity.
Yeah,
My argument is simpler than yours.
yeah,
My argument is simply that the Tea Act leads directly to the Boston Tea Party, and that is and that leads to repressive measures, to the intolerable acts, etc.,
yeah.
which leads to revolution. I think that you have to spin out a longer and more torturous sort of set of reasoning. Um, Maybe I'm exaggerating, not torturous,
Yeah.
but slightly more
I
complicated.
think this is a good one. Unlike the
Um,
other crappy question we dealt with earlier, this is a good 10 marker because it's like you've got meat both ways. I think you can make a good, strong
yeah,
case.
but I think the lesson for this is that actually you can make a decent case for either side,
Yeah.
as long as you frame it in the right way.
Yeah.
Um,
I'd like to
if
think they normally do give, occasionally they give really duffer questions, but this is this is
Yeah,
a good
this is a good
one.
one.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. And then the essay one, which is really key because it's basically assess the reasons why Britain was unable to defeat the American colonists during the period of 1775 to 1777. In the next exam paper, they've got the one on basically why did the Americans win the war, but this is slightly different. And the
Mm,
one why they won the war, I don't think we should bother doing because we've literally done that in the unit 3 when we went through it. Because anyone that's like literally from the essay pack isn't worth us doing because we've done it already.
yeah,
But this one's interesting because the dates. So it's only from 1775 to 1777, which means that only goes up to Saratoga, the end of the year with Saratoga, which means that basically French entry to the war doesn't happen till the year later. So therefore,
yeah,
external factors is out in this, which
yeah. So we're
yeah,
just talking about the early stages of the war,
yeah.
um, and specifically between, I guess, the British and the rebels.
Yeah, it's basically between Lexington, Concord, and Saratoga. If you look at dates, that's when you're looking at the years, you've got to be like, all right, what's in this? So it's
Yeah,
Lexington, Concord, and Saratoga. So basically, this is again going to be a 4 paragraph essay because there's no other logical way to. So both of these would lend themselves. I'm happy that they now allow us to do 4 paragraph essays because they lend themselves quite easily. Because this one is only really going to be American strength or British weakness. Because there's no other factor because it's out,
yeah,
because
yeah,
external factors. So it's like the other question, except external factors is gone. And obviously, like
yeah.
Yorktown and other stuff is gone. So you can't have that in there. So, do you want to, shall I go through and then you tell me which one you're going to argue? Or shall I bring up the two sides?
Sure, why not?
Yeah, cool. So obviously, like the colonists being the main reason why they weren't defeated. So you can still bring in most of the arguments. So the fact that they didn't need to be defeated, that they only had to survive is still a critical factor in the strength. Washington's leadership is still really important in this. And Trenton and removing the Hessians, the counterattack over the river is still important. Valley Forge and training up the army, the Prussian generals is still important in this one. Although less so because it's right at the end. Saratoga still important. Like Gates's victory there is important as well, and like the fact that they managed to take Bunker Hill, beat the British soldiers for the first time, sends out the professionalism argument, and also that they're able to, you know, drive like survive. Washington manages to stay in the field and stay alive long enough to do it. I think all of these things are important. Anything else you want to think of on the American strengths?
American strengths. Yeah,
Yeah,
I would put it. I would just put it as tenacity, I guess.
yeah,
Which is I think compose is there's two factors to that. One is a certain amount of unity,
yeah,
given that the states all come together, right? We
yeah,
have the Declaration. Yeah. Well, that's 1776, so that's a year that's in between.
yeah. Similar,
Um,
yeah,
but there is general unanimity on this part of at least on the government, the
yeah,
colonial governments. Obviously, there are loyalists within each state. Um, so there's that. There's Washington's own leadership, which is not, I think, very brilliant militarily, but he's able to hold on, keep things
yeah,
together, which I think is almost maybe even more important than actually winning a battle.
yeah,
Um, there's also and the other point that I think is important is that I would mention is just poor or mediocre British leadership in
yeah. That's the other paragraph.
the
So yeah, if you want to
yeah
start, you want to do the
yeah
British weaknesses, then I'll add to it if there's anything. So yeah,
yeah sure, why not? I think the really big one is I don't I mean Bunker Hill to some extent maybe they could have nipped that in the bud if they actually had enough force.
well, if they
But the
hadn't,
prop
if they bothered like making sure the high ground surrounding their navy and their main armies was like occupied,
yeah
because they could have done.
yeah
They had control of the port.
yeah. But I don't. I think that the really missed opportunity for the British was letting Washington escape in New York.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that's a result of I think better leadership, a better general.
yeah,
That's how, right?
yeah,
A better general who was a bit more active, had more initiative,
yeah,
and actually went after Washington and drove him into a corner and forced him to surrender, destroyed the army. I think that would have been pretty decisive. It's hard to say, obviously, but I think if anything, if anything could have changed, turned the tide, I think it was then, and then after that, it becomes increasingly difficult. The loss, um, the British take Pennsylvania, correct?
yeah. They take Philadelphia.
They take Philadelphia, sorry, Philadelphia, and Washington's able to scrape together a few minor victories.
Yeah, symbolic but
Um,
important victories though, because you,
Symbolic, but important when your morale is flagging.
yeah,
So I think better British leadership would have prevented that,
yeah.
and could have been decisive.
Yeah, let me
That's
add
my
that, and
argument.
then we can decide
Yeah.
which side we're going to go on. So obviously they were not despotic enough as well, so they didn't go all out like full guns blazing on in terms of doing stuff. As you already said, Bunker Hill, they failed. They failed to capture Washington the way out. They failed to really understand the war by trying to take Philadelphia in the first place because the Americans were
Mm.
never going to give up just their capital gone. There are difficulties of communication because it was such a large area. There was rivalries in the generals, like Carleton failed to once they, counterattacked the American attack on Canada, they failed to get all the way down. That you could argue was Benedict Arnold's skill in protecting the lake if you want to argue American strengths as well. But then
Mm.
obviously the Gentleman Johnny's piano booze ridden Southern March down, like St. Ledger's failure to join him,
That's true.
Clinton's failure to
So,
meet up, you
yeah.
know, uh Burgoyne basically saying that getting the Native American soldiers to fight on their side and then ending up with the in McCrae murder that ended up boosting militia against him because he basically said Native Americans were going to do it and he played into the hands of American propaganda.
Yeah.
Also failed to stay in the fort when he could have done moved on to Saratoga, lost a huge army, which was massively important right at the end of this
Yeah. Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
But I think basically there was no real significant British successes in this time period. It was mostly failings of their generals. And another thing that's understated as well, they could have had the South on their side, but their promise to free the slaves kind of,
Yeah.
turned the loyalists in the South against them as well. So it was a lot of own goals. I mean, I still think they probably wouldn't have done it anyway, but there was a lot of British failures in this time. Certainly moments where, although Saratoga was the beginning of the end, I think that you're right that the key moment was how failing to take Washington coming out of Long Island, because if he got him there, that might well have changed the war.
Yeah, I think Saratoga made it very difficult for the British to win.
Yeah,
But I think I think that yeah, I think that it's earlier than that, with General Howe in Washington that make a quick victory, yeah, take victory out of the picture.
yeah. So without external, are you
So
going British weakness then as the major factor?
yeah, I'd say a combination of poor leadership and tenacity on the Americans' part.
Yeah,
It's
to be
not it's not
honest,
asking you where the British weakness. It's just saying assess the reasons. So you can
yeah,
just give a couple of reasons, and
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's sufficient.
yeah, yeah, and then overline it. Yeah, yeah, combination of the two. Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool.
Um,
Finish that paper then. It's fairly easy. Let's save that one up.